It was winter, the kind that wrapped the city in grey mornings and breath that lingered in the air. People moved quickly through the station, collars turned up, scarves pulled tight, hands buried deep in pockets. The 8 a.m. train from Iver was always busy, always punctual, always the same. David had been catching it for years. Every weekday morning he arrived at the platform at almost exactly the same time, coat buttoned neatly, mind already drifting toward meetings, numbers, and decisions that carried more weight than he ever let on. He liked the train because it was predictable. It gave him a buffer between home and work, a space where he could be anonymous for an hour before becoming the man people expected him to be. Carrie had only been catching the train for 2 months. She'd moved to the area on a quiet impulse. New job, new flat, new chapter. The train station sat almost ridiculously close to her front door, close enough that she could hear the morning announcements if her window was open. At first, everything about the commute felt unfamiliar. The rhythm, the faces, the unspoken rules of where to stand and when to move. But gradually, patterns emerged. There was the woman with the red scarf who always read paperback novels. The man who tapped his foot impatiently near the ticket barriers. And then, there was him, David. She didn't know his name, of course. She only knew his face, calm, composed, quietly handsome. He stood a little apart from the crowds, very well dressed in an expensive-looking coat and scarf. His hair always neatly styled. He was calm. He looked intelligent, like he had a senior position at work. He always stood at a distance. With time, she noticed him more and more, as if he was intentionally standing closer to her every day. More often than not, they ended up in the same carriage, sitting a few rows apart. Sometimes their eyes met briefly before they both looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. For weeks, they existed like that, parallel lives, moving in sync without touching. Until one morning, Carrie realized she was smiling before she meant to. It startled her, this small, instinctive curve of her lips, when she saw him step onto the platform. And then, just as unexpectedly, he smiled back. It was subtle, polite, but unmistakable. From that day on, it became a quiet ritual. They boarded the same train, found seats nearby, and reached for their phones at the same time. Both scrolled through messages, responding only to the ones that felt urgent enough to interrupt the gentle calm of the journey. Sometimes Carrie caught his reflection in the window. Sometimes David noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she concentrated. Neither spoke, but something had shifted. On a particularly cold morning, frost clinging to the platform edges, Carrie made a decision she surprised herself with. As she settled into her seat and looked up, she didn't reach for her phone. Neither did he. There was a pause, brief, fragile, and then David spoke. "It feels like we're always on this train together." Carrie laughed, relieved. "I was thinking the same thing. I started wondering if you were imaginary." He smiled properly then. "I promise I'm real." They talked easily after that, as though the conversation had been waiting patiently for months. He asked if she lived nearby. She told him she lived practically next door to the station. He told her he drove 20 minutes to get there, explaining that the train took him straight to his office and spared him the misery of city traffic. When he mentioned he worked as a hedge fund manager, Carrie nodded, unfazed. She didn't pretend to understand the intricacies of it, only that it involved finance and long hours. She told him she was a customer success manager, and he listened with genuine interest. She noticed they were both wearing thick coats, gloves tucked away, neither revealing much about their professional selves. For now, that felt right. She had to get off at Bank Station, as she did every morning, but as she stood to leave, making no effort to hide her reluctance to leave his side, David explained he has to get off at the very next stop, at Liverpool Street Station. They both realized that their offices were only minutes apart, separated by one underground stop. As the train slowed, David hesitated, then asked if she'd like to get a drink sometime. He had taken a look earlier at her left hand and noticed it was bare of any ring. He had decided he would take a chance. "Yes," she said, smiling. "I'd like that." They agreed to meet that evening. It was only later, when she saw him standing inside the bar after work, that Carrie realized what hedge fund manager truly meant. His suit was immaculate, tailored in a way she'd only seen in magazines. The fabric alone looked like it cost more than her monthly rent. She felt a flicker of self-consciousness, but it faded quickly when he smiled at her, warm and unmistakably the same man from the train. Over drinks, he admitted he had a senior role. He mentioned bonuses vaguely, brushing past the topic as though it were incidental. Carrie appreciated that. She liked that he didn't lead with numbers or status. What mattered was how he listened, how he laughed, how time seemed to loosen its grip on the evening. After that, the routine changed, but only slightly. They still met on the train every morning, still sat nearby, still shared smiles. But now there were drinks after work, at least once a week. Sometimes twice. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite foods, their faith, places they'd never been but wanted to see. There were no phone calls at first, no rushing, just anticipation. Until one evening, 4 weeks in, Carrie's phone rang unexpectedly. David. She smiled before answering. That call became the first of many. Soon, evenings were spent talking, until one of them laughed and said they should probably sleep. They became inseparable in the quiet way that grows naturally, without force. Spring arrived without them noticing. Phone calls became dates. They would meet alone at first, then eventually they introduced each other to friends and family. They became closer, went to church together, took went to parties together, and did many other things couples do. He respected her boundaries. He didn't get physical too soon. They cuddled, but nothing untoward. Months later, David asked her to walk with him one evening, instead of going straight home. They wandered through the city, hands brushing, until he stopped beneath softly glowing lights. I don't want to imagine a life where you're just someone I met on a train, he said. Carrie's heart raced. Neither do I. He reached into his pocket, his hands suddenly not as steady as she'd come to expect. He knelt, right there on the pavement, oblivious to the world. Carrie, he said, voice full and certain, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, laughing through tears, 1,000 times yes. And the next morning, they still caught the 8 a.m. train, together.